Stepmom stole $2 million from me. Grandpa's plan bankrupted her for $12 million. My grandpa used to say something that stuck with me like barnacles on a boat hull. He'd look out the water, squinting through the salt spray, and tell me, God made land so people would have somewhere to stand while they fish. Real life happens in the water. I was 5 when my dad left. Mom had just passed, and apparently grief wasn't his thing. He traded me for a dirt bike and a blonde he met at some dive bar in Miami. Said he needed to chase opportunities. Fast money. Big city dreams. All that garbage people say when they're running away from responsibility. But Grandpa stayed. He didn't just stay. He became my whole world. While other kids were learning to throw footballs, I was learning to patch trawl nets, so the repair looked accidental instead of obvious. While they were at soccer practice, I was out on the water learning what Grandpa called respecting the pressure. In the ocean and in life, he'd say, you got to know when to push and when to let the current do the work. Our hands always smelled like salt and two-stroke engine oil. That mix became home to me, more than any address ever could. We lived in this old boathouse in the Keys. Nothing fancy. The kind of place where the floorboards creaked with stories and the walls wore their age like metals. Tourists would drive past taking pictures, calling it rustic or authentic, or whatever word rich people use for old and worn down. But to us, it was perfect. We had the ocean 60 feet from our front door and a deep water channel that cut straight to open sea. Grandpa ran a small charter fishing business. Nothing huge, just him, his boat, and decades of knowing where the fish actually were while everyone else wasted gas following GPS coordinates. He'd laugh watching those fancy boats with all their electronics zoom past us. Technology, he'd say, can tell you where fish were yesterday. Experience tells you where they'll be tomorrow. The man was a philosopher disguised as a fisherman. He taught me everything. How to read weather in the color of the morning sky. How to tie knots that wouldn't slip when your life depended on them. How to get a fish so clean you barely lost any meat. But more than that, he taught me to think. Really think. He'd make me figure stuff out myself, instead of just handing me answers. Why do you think that line snapped? He'd ask after I lost a big catch. I pulled too hard. I'd say, nope, try again. The hook was bad? He'd shake his head. You didn't check it before you cast. See, in life and fishing, the mistake happens way before the failure shows up. That's the kind of stuff that sticks with you. Then came last year, January. Cold for Florida, which means barely cold at all, but we felt it anyway. Grandpa was in the shop organizing tackle when he went down. Stroke, the big kind that changes everything. I found him on the floor surrounded by fishing lures, his left side not working right, trying to tell me something, but the words wouldn't come out straight. Scariest moment of my life. Hands down. The ambulance took forever, even though the hospital was only 20 minutes away. Felt like 20 hours. He survived it. Barely. Lost most of the movement on his left side, and his speech got slurred, but his mind was still sharp. You could see it in his eyes. He was trapped in a body that wouldn't cooperate anymore, but the man I knew was still in there, watching everything. That's when they showed up, like sharks smelling blood in the water from a mile away. My father, Daniel, and his new wife, Sherry. I hadn't seen my dad in probably 15 years. Didn't miss him either. Last I heard, he was selling timeshares or running some hustle in Miami. The kind of guy who wore too much cologne and talked about networking. Every sentence had the word opportunity in it. He smelled like desperation wearing an expensive watch. But Sherry, man, Sherry was something else entirely. She was a real estate agent. The Miami kind. You know the type. White blazer. A smile that looked like it had been practiced in front of a mirror 1,000 times. Hair sprayed so stiff it could survive a hurricane. Those ridiculous designer sunglasses that cost more than my truck. She looked at our boathouse the way a butcher looks at a cow. Not as something alive with history and meaning. Just as cuts of meat waiting to be sold. I remember the first time she walked into Grandpa's room at the hospital. She did this weird fake gas thing, like she was auditioning for a soap opera. Oh, Daddy, she cooed at him. We're here to take care of everything. You just focus on getting better. Grandpa looked at me. Even with half his face not working, I could read his expression. It said, "This is bad." They moved into the boathouse within a week. Said it made sense since someone needed to be there full time. For insurance purposes, Sherry kept saying. Everything with her was about insurance or market value or developmental potential. She talked about our home like it was a spreadsheet. My dad played the dutiful son role, bringing Grandpa to appointments, handling paperwork, making sure I couldn't get 5 minutes alone with him. Every time I tried to visit, suddenly Grandpa was sleeping or having a bad day, or the doctor said he needed rest. But I knew what was really happening. I'd seen enough nature documentaries to recognize a coordinated hunt when I saw one. Sherry started working on him immediately. She'd sit by his bed with these stacks of papers, chirping away in that fake sweet voice. "Just some medical forms, Daddy, for your insurance. Just your signature here. These are protective measures. We want to make sure you're taken care of if anything happens." Grandpa was weak. His right hand still worked, but it trembled when he tried to write. And he'd look at me over her shoulder with these eyes that said so much he couldn't speak out loud anymore. He knew. He absolutely knew what they were doing. But what could he do? What could I do? I was 26 years old with a high school diploma and calluses on my hands from pulling nets. They had lawyers. Or at least Sherry kept mentioning lawyers like she had a whole firm on speed dial. I had nothing. The worst part was watching him sign those papers. His hand would shake, so bad the pen barely worked. But Sherry would just smile and steady his wrist, guiding across the signature line like she was helping him, being supportive. My father just stood in the corner, nodding, useless as always. One time I pushed past him and got into Grandpa's room before they could stop me. It was maybe 3 weeks before he died. He was sitting up in bed, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. The kind of tired that's not about sleep. Sherry was packing up her briefcase. Papers everywhere. She gave me this look like I was a mosquito at a barbecue. Annoying but not worth real attention. "Your grandfather needs his rest," she said, not even try to hide the ice in her voice. I ignored her, went straight to his bedside. "Hey, Gramps, how you feeling?" He tried to talk, but the words came out wrong. His good hand grabbed mine, though. Squeezed it hard. Harder than you'd think a sick old man could squeeze. Behind me, I could hear my father and Sherry talking. Not even whispered. Just casual conversation about lot prices and waterfront premiums, like Grandpa wasn't even there. Like he was already gone, and they were just dividing up his stuff. Sherry mentioned something about comparable sales in the area. My father asked about development restrictions. They talked about him like he was a piece of land instead of a human being. The last time I saw Grandpa live, I wasn't supposed to be there. I'd driven over after my shift at the dock, hoping to catch him alone, but I heard them in the hallway before I even got to his room. My father and Sherry, arguing, but not angry arguing. Excited arguing. Like when two people are trying to decide which expensive restaurant to go to. The developer is willing to go to 2.2 if we can close by end of month. Sherry was saying, "That's better than we thought." My father responded, "When can we move forward? I've already got the paperwork ready. We just need to wait until—" She paused. "You know." They laughed. Actually laughed. I waited until they left. Then I slipped into Grandpa's room. He looked smaller than I remembered. Smaller than seemed possible for a man who'd hauled nets in rough seas for 40 years. The stroke had eaten him away from the inside. But when he saw me, something changed his eyes. Focus. Purpose. He lifted his good hand and did something he'd done my whole life when he wanted me to really pay attention. He tapped his temple twice with his finger. Slow and deliberate. Think. That was his gesture for, use your brain. Don't be stupid. Figure this out. Then he pointed. Not at the TV, not at the window. At his nightstand. At an old, water-stained logbook, sitting there like it had been waiting. His boat log. The one he'd kept for decades. Recording every trip, every catch, every detail about the water and weather and fish. The pages were swollen from moisture, and the cover was held together with duct tape. I didn't get it. Didn't understand what he was trying to tell me. I picked it up, flipped through a few pages. Saw his handwriting getting shakier in recent entries. Saw coordinates and tide tables and notes about barometric pressure. Gramps, I don't understand, I said. He tapped his temple again. Harder this time, frustrated that I wasn't getting it. But before I could ask more, I heard footsteps in the hall. I shoved the logbook back and stepped away from the bed just as Sherry walked in with that predatory smile. Time's up, she announced. Like visiting my own grandfather required an appointment she controlled. I left. I had to. That was the last conversation I ever had with him. If you can call a conversation when only one person can actually talk. Grandpa died on a Tuesday. They called me at 6 a.m. Not my father. Not Sherry. The hospital. By the time I got there, he was already gone. Peaceful, they said. Slipped away in his sleep. I stood there in that sterile room looking at this empty body that used to be the man who raised me, and I felt completely hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides and left just a shell. He'd been my anchor, my constant, the one person who'd never left. And now he was gone. I stayed there for maybe an hour, just sitting. The nurses were nice about it. They let me have time. Finally, I walked out to the parking lot. My father was there, talking on his phone by his rental car. When he saw me, he wrapped up the call quick. Sorry for your loss. Son, he said it like he was reading from a script, like someone had told him those were the appropriate words to use. I didn't respond. Couldn't. Sherry came out a few minutes later. She wasn't on the phone. She was smiling. Not a big smile. Just this little satisfied curve at the corner of her mouth. The kind of smile you have when something you've been working on finally comes together. She walked right past me, got in the passenger seat, and before my father even had the car started, I heard her voice drifting through the open window. I already called the developer. They can start the site assessment next week. 1 hour. My grandfather had been dead for 1 hour, still laying in that hospital bed upstairs, and she was already planning how to tear down his home. I sat in my truck in that parking lot for a long time, watching them drive away, watching the sunrise turn the sky from black to gray to that pale Florida blue. My phone buzzed. Text from my father. Funeral arrangements are handled. Thursday at 10 a.m. Quick service. Family only. We'll talk about the estate afterward. That was it. That was all I got. An announcement about my own grandfather's funeral, like it was a dentist appointment. I looked at that text for a long time. Then I remembered Grandpa's gesture. The tapping on his temple, the pointing at the logbook. He'd been trying to tell me something. In those last moments, when he could barely move or speak, he'd use what strength he had left to give me a message. I just didn't know what it meant yet, but I was about to find out. The funeral was Thursday morning, 10 o'clock sharp. It lasted maybe 30 minutes. Tops. I've seen drive-through oil changes that took longer. There were maybe a dozen people there. A few old fishing buddies of Grandpa's who looked uncomfortable in their dress shirts. The pastor who'd never met him reading generic verses about eternal rest. My father checking his phone every 5 minutes. And Sherry, wearing black like she was supposed to, but somehow making it look like a business meeting. She had this little clutch purse that matched her heels perfectly. Who coordinates accessories for a funeral? The whole thing felt wrong. Rushed. Like everyone was just going through motions they'd seen in movies but didn't actually understand. When it was over, people came up to offer condolences. I shook hands. Said thank you. Felt nothing. Just this weird numbness where emotions should have been. One of Grandpa's old friends, a guy named Pete who'd known him for 40 years, pulled me aside. He had tears in his eyes. Real ones. Your grandfather was a good man, he said. Best fisherman I ever knew. And I mean that as a compliment to his character, not just his skill. I nodded. Couldn't trust myself to speak. Pete squeezed my shoulder and walked away. Then I saw Sherry. She was standing by the exit, talking to someone I didn't recognize. Some woman in a pantsuit. Sherry handed her a business card with this practiced smile, gesturing like she was describing something exciting. I got closer, heard pieces of their conversation. Waterfront property is absolutely booming right now, Sherry was saying. If you ever think about selling, I'd love to help you maximize your investment. At my grandfather's funeral. She was networking at my grandfather's funeral. The woman took the card, looking slightly uncomfortable, and made some excuse to leave. My father appeared at my elbow. "We need to talk about this estate," he said. "Tonight, no point dragging this out." That evening I drove to the boathouse. Their rental car was already there. Through the window, I could see them inside, moving around like they owned the place. Because legally, apparently, they did. I walked in, and Sherry was sitting at our kitchen table. The same table where Grandpa had taught me to tie fishing knots. Where we'd eaten about 10,000 meals together. Where he'd helped me with homework, even though he'd only finished 8th grade himself. She had papers spread out everywhere. Documents with official seals and tiny print. She didn't say hello. Didn't ask how I was holding up. Just gestured to the chair across from her, like she was conducting a business transaction. Which I guess she was. "Sit down," she said. "We need to go over some things." I sat. My father stood behind her, hands in his pockets, looking anywhere but at me. Sherry slid a document across the table. Power of attorney. The header read, "Dated 3 weeks ago. As you can see, your grandfather gave Daniel full legal authority to handle his affairs. That includes all property decisions." She said it like she was explaining something simple to someone slow. I picked up the paper. Saw Grandpa's shaky signature at the bottom. Remembered watching him sign it while his hand trembled, Sherry holding his wrist steady. "We've accepted an offer from Coastal Development Group," she continued. $2 million. The sale closes in 2 weeks. $2 million for property that had been in our family for 3 generations. For a boathouse that sat on one of the last undeveloped waterfront lots in the Keys. "That's it?" I heard myself say. Sherry smiled that practiced smile. "It's actually quite fair given the condition of the structures. The buyer plans to demolish and rebuild. Some kind of luxury resort concept. Coral Vistas or something like that. Demolish." She said it so casually. Like she was talking about throwing away old furniture, instead of erasing the only home I'd ever known. My father finally spoke up. "This is what's best. Son, your grandfather wasn't in his right mind at the end. We're just doing what needed to be done." I looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who'd left when I was 5. Who'd missed every birthday, every Christmas, every single day of my life for 21 years. Who'd shown up the second he smelled money. "You don't get to call me son," I said quietly. Sherry cut in before he could respond. "Regardless of personal feelings, the legal situation is clear. Daniel has power of attorney. The property is being sold. You'll need to vacate within 24 hours. 24 hours. I'd lived there my entire life, and they were giving me 1 day to get out. There is some good news," my father offered weakly. "You'll receive $3,000 from this state. Once all debts and fees are settled. 3,000 out of 2 million. Sherry was already packing up her papers. "I suggest you start boxing up your personal items tonight. The estate sale company comes tomorrow at 9 to handle the rest." "Estate sale," I repeated. She looked up, irritated at having to explain. "Everything in the house needs to be liquidated. Furniture, equipment, personal effects. Whatever doesn't sell goes to donation or disposal. Standard procedure. Standard procedure." She had an answer for everything, all dressed up in legal language that made it sound reasonable instead of what it actually was. Theft. That night, I barely slept. Just sat on the porch watching the water, listening to the sound that had been my lullaby for 26 years. The gentle slap of waves against the pilings. The creak of the dock. The distant rumble of a boat engine somewhere out in the dark. Morning came too fast. By 8:30, there were already people there. The estate sale company showed up in a truck with their logo on the side, bright and cheerful. Some cheesy slogan about treasure hunting. They brought tables, signs, price tags. Sherry directed them like a conductor with an orchestra. "This goes here. Price that low. We're trying to move volume. That's trash. Just throw it out." My father mostly stayed inside. Coward. I watched him drag out Grandpa's life piece by piece. His tools, his fishing gear, his furniture. Everything marked with little white stickers, showing prices that were insulting. By 10 o'clock, people started showing up, mostly tourists looking for nautical decorations for their beach houses up north, or retirees furnishing their condos with character on a budget. They picked through his stuff like vultures on roadkill. I saw a woman buy his old brass barometer for $5. $5 for an instrument he'd checked every morning for 40 years. She told her husband it would look perfect in their RV. Someone else bought his tackle box for $10. The same box he'd organized with religious precision. Every lure and hook in its specific place for a specific reason. A kid, maybe 12 years old, was playing with Grandpa's fishing rod, swinging it around like a toy. His parents bought it for $15, and the kid immediately dropped it in the parking lot, cracking the handle. Nobody cared. To them, this was just stuff. Old junk that looked weathered and authentic. Props for their coastal aesthetic. But every single item had a story. Every scratch and dent was a memory. That dent in the tackle box was from when it fell overboard and Grandpa dove in to get it, because some of those lures were from his father. That worn spot on the fishing rod was where his hands had gripped it 1,000 times, teaching me to cast. None of that mattered to anyone. It was all just inventory to be cleared out. I was standing there, numb and useless, when I saw Sherry pick up something from a pile near the door. Grandpa's logbook, the water-stained duct-tape journal he'd kept for decades, the one he'd pointed at with the last strength he had. She held it away from her body, like it might contaminate her, made this exaggerated, disgusted face. God, this thing reeks, she announced to nobody in particular. Mildew and fish. How did he even keep this? She walked toward the dumpster they brought for trash. My brain suddenly clicked on. The gesture, the tapping on his temple, the pointing. Wait, I called out. Can I have that? Sherry turned, surprised I'd spoken. She looked at the logbook, then at me, then laughed. This piece of garbage? My father came outside, drawn by the commotion. He saw what she was holding and actually laughed too. That old thing? Sure, take it. Consider it your inheritance. He thought that was hilarious. Kept chuckling about it. The old fool never had any business sense. Left you a soggy notebook instead of anything valuable. Sherry held out with 2 fingers, her nose wrinkled. You'll probably want to spray it with something. Maybe burn it and buy a new one. She dropped it into my hands like she was relieved to be rid of it. My father shook his head, still amused. At least you'll have something to read in whatever apartment you end up renting. Assuming you can stand the smell. Sherry was already walking away. Make sure you're completely out by 6 tonight. The new owners want to start work tomorrow. She didn't even look back. I stood there holding that logbook, while strangers carry my grandfather's life out the door piece by piece. $20 here, $50 there. Everything he'd built and owned reduced to pocket change. By noon, the house was basically empty. By 2, the buyers had mostly cleared out. By 4, the estate sale company was packing up their tables. I gathered my stuff into 2 duffel bags and some boxes. That's all I had. Everything I owned in the world fit into the bed of my truck. Sherry and my father were on the porch, drinking champagne. Actual champagne. Celebrating. She saw me loading my truck and raised her glass. You'll land on your feet, she called out. You're young. Plenty of opportunities out there. My father joined in. Maybe this is the push you needed. Get out of this town. Make something of yourself. Make something of myself. From the man who'd made nothing but excuses his entire life. I threw the last box in the truck bed, placed a logbook on the passenger seat, wrapped in a plastic bag to keep it from stinking up the cab, drove away without looking back. In my rear-view mirror, I could see them toasting each other. Sherry's white blazer bright in the sun. My father's arm around her shoulders. Both of them laughing about something. They'd won. Completely and totally. They had the land worth millions. They had their $2 million sale. They had their next chapter all planned out. And I had a Moldy notebook and $3,000 to my name. I ended up at a motel off Highway 1. The kind of place that charges by the week and doesn't ask questions as long as you pay cash. $50 a night. The room smelled like cigarettes and cleaning chemicals trying to cover up worse smells. The bed was hard. The TV only got basic cable. The air conditioner rattled like it was dying. But it was cheap, and it was shelter, and that was about all I could afford now. I sat on that bed with the logbook in my lap. Just sat there. Couldn't bring myself to open it yet. Outside, I could hear traffic on the highway. The hum of the neon sign advertising vacancy. Someone arguing in the next room over. This was my life now. A motel room and a dead man's journal. Grandpa's words kept echoing in my head. The thing he used to say when we'd be out on the water and other boats would speed past us. Their captains showing off their expensive gear and fancy electronics. People always look at the surface, he'd say. They see the shine and think that's where the power is. But that's where the predators hunt. In the shallows, where everything's pretty and visible. Real power is in the deep, where most folks never think to look. I looked down at the logbook. This beat-up, water-damaged thing that smelled like bait and age. They'd thrown it away. Literally thrown it in the trash. Because to them it was worthless. Just another piece of junk from an old man who didn't know any better. But Grandpa had used his last strength to point at it, to make sure I knew it was important. Think, he'd told me. Use your head. I finally opened it. Started at the beginning. Pages and pages of fishing logs. Grandpa's handwriting from decades ago, strong and clear. July 15th, 1987. Caught 400 pounds of grouper off the reef. Barometric pressure 1018, dropping fast. Storm rolled in by evening. August 3rd, 1989. Tourist charter. For guys from Ohio. Terrible tippers, but easy work. Pressure steady at 1015. On and on. Years of it. Every trip documented. Weather conditions. Coordinates. Tide tables. Water temperature. What worked, what didn't. I kept flipping. Watched his handwriting change over time. Getting a little shakier. The entries getting shorter as he got older. But still, page after page of fish counts and barometric readings, and notes about wind direction. I'd been reading for maybe 2 hours when I realized something. My eyes were tired. My back hurt from hunching over, and I had absolutely no idea what I was looking at. This was just a fishing log. Decades of fishing data. What was I supposed to do with this? Sell it to some marine biology department? Frame it as a memorial? I flipped to the more recent entries. The last year of his life. His handwriting barely legible. Trembling lines that showed how hard it was for him to hold a pen. But he'd kept writing, even after the stroke, recording every detail like it mattered. The last entry was dated May 20th, 5 days before he died. Pressure dropping. Storm coming. That was it. His final words in 40 years of documentation. A weather report. I closed the logbook, set it on the nightstand next to the bed, stared at the water-stained cover with its peeling duct tape. This was what he'd wanted me to have. This was the message he'd used his last strength to give me. Weather reports and fish counts. I wanted to scream. Wanted to throw something. Wanted to drive back to that boathouse and force my father to explain what the hell had just happened to my life. But instead I just sat there in that cheap motel room, listening to traffic and someone's TV through the wall, holding a moldy notebook that smelled like the ocean. They had everything. The land, the money, the future. And I had weather reports from 1987. Grandpa had always said I was smart, that I could figure things out if I just stopped and thought about them. Used my head instead of reacting. But I couldn't figure this out. Couldn't see what he'd been trying to tell me. Maybe there was nothing to figure out. Maybe he'd just been a sick old man who didn't know what he was doing anymore. Maybe I was looking for meaning where there wasn't any. I lay back on that hard motel bed, closed my eyes. Tomorrow I'd need to start looking for real work. Figure out where I was going to live long term. Start building whatever was left of my life from the ground up. But tonight, I was just tired. Tired of losing. Tired of watching people take things that weren't theirs. Tired of being powerless while everyone else made the decisions. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the highway. The neon vacancy sign buzzed and flickered. And somewhere out there in the darkness, the ocean kept moving. Tides coming in and going out like they had for millions of years. Not caring about property deeds or power of attorney, or who won and who lost. Water holds everything. Grandpa had written in that logbook. I still didn't know what he meant, but I was about to find out. I woke up the next morning with my neck stiff from sleeping wrong, and the logbook still sitting on the nightstand staring at me like an accusation. The motel coffee tasted like burnt tire rubber, but I drank it anyway. Needed the caffeine. Needed something to clear my head. I picked up the logbook again. Started from the beginning. Slower this time. More careful. There had to be something I was missing. Grandpa wouldn't have pointed at this with his dying strength if it was just fishing records. He was deliberate about everything. Every action had a purpose. I read through the entries again. Decades of them. Watching his handwriting change from strong and confident to shaky and uncertain. And then I realized something I had missed the night before. I'd been reading chronologically, front to back, like a normal book. But when Grandpa had pointed at it in the hospital, the logbook had been open to a specific page. The last page. I flipped to the end, past all the fishing records, past the weather reports, to where the entry stopped being about fish and started being about something else entirely. There, May 15th, 3 weeks before he died. The handwriting was barely legible. Trembling lines that must have taken him forever to write. But the words were clear enough once I focused. Sherry brought papers today. Called the medical forms for insurance. Blood pressure 180/120. They think I'm a fool. Called Boggs. Activated sea urchin. Water holds everything. I read it 3 times. Then 4. Boggs. Not a place. Not a thing. A person. Mr. Boggs. Grandpa's lawyer friend down in Key West. My hand started shaking. Sea urchin. That phrase tickled something in my memory. Way back. I'd been maybe 8 or 9 years old, sitting on the dock with Grandpa while he organized his tackle box. He'd been laughing about something, setting up what he called his insurance policy. You know why I'm calling it sea urchin? He'd said, grinning. Because if anyone ever tries to grab it without knowing what they're dealing with, they're going to get stuck in 1,000 places they didn't expect. Those spines go deep. I thought he was talking about a fishing technique, some way to rig a line or set a trap for lobster. I was wrong. I grabbed my phone, searched for Boggs Legal Services, Key West, found it immediately. Old school law office. One of those places that probably still use paper files and had a secretary who answered the phone instead of voicemail. My finger hovered over call button. What if I was wrong? What if this was just me being desperate, seeing patterns where there weren't any? But then I remembered Grandpa's gesture, the 2 taps on his temple. Think, use your head. I called. The phone rang twice. A woman answered, professional but warm. Boggs Legal Services. How may I help you? Hi, I need to speak with Mr. Boggs. My name is Tom. Tom Franklin. I'm Frank Franklin's grandson. There was a pause. Just a beat of silence that told me she recognized the name. 1 moment, please. Hold music. Some instrumental jazz that sounded like it was recorded in 1970. Then a voice. Gravelly. Old but sharp. Tom, I was wondering when you'd call. Started to worry you weren't going to figure out. My heart was hammering. Figure what out? The logbook. Your grandfather told me if anything happened to him, you'd eventually figure out the last entry. Told me you were smart like him. Just needed time to think things through. Mr. Boggs, I don't understand what's happening. He chuckled. A dry sound like wine through dried leaves. Your grandfather was a brilliant man. Nobody gave him credit for it because he never finished school, spent his life on a fishing boat. But that man could play chess 3 moves ahead of everyone else. What did he do? About 10 years ago, he came to see me. Said he wanted to set something up. Protection, he called it. Asked me if there was a way to legally lock something down so tight that no power of attorney, no legal trickery, no smooth-talking real estate agent could ever touch it. I sat down on the motel bed. My legs weren't working right. Go on. I told him about irrevocable trusts. How once you set one up properly, it's bulletproof. You can't change it. Can't dissolve it. It exists independent of the person who created it. He loved that idea. Said it was like setting a trap. That would still work even after you were gone. A trap. Mr. Boggs continued. So we created the Sea Urchin Trust. Named it that at your grandfather's insistence. He thought it was hilarious. Said anyone who tried to grab it would get stuck worse than reaching into a tide pool barefoot. What's in it? I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. Not the land, he said. And that's the genius part. That's what makes it brilliant instead of just clever. I don't understand. Your grandfather knew his son, Tom. Knew Daniel better than Daniel knew himself. Knew that if there was ever an opportunity to make quick money off that property, your father would take it without thinking twice. So Frank let him have the land. Let them think they'd won. Let them focus all their attention on the property deed and the buildings and the waterfront lot. But they forgot about the water. Sherry checked the land records. Did her due diligence on the property itself. But she never looked at the maritime easements. Never checked the commercial access rights. Oh my God. The trust owns the Deepwater Channel access rights. Has since 1998. Your grandfather transferred them to the trust 26 years ago when he first set it up. The only navigable route from that property to open ocean. Every boat that wants to get out to sea from that lot has to go through that channel. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't form words. Your father just sold a $50 million luxury resort development that has no way to access the ocean, Mr. Boggs said. I could hear the smile in his voice. It's waterfront property that can't use the water, like selling someone a car with no engine. Sure looks nice sitting there, but it's not going anywhere. And I own it? You're the sole beneficiary and trustee. Became official the moment your grandfather died. He appointed you years ago. Been sitting here waiting for you to call. My brain was trying to catch up. Processing. The power of attorney my father has. Worthless against a trust, Boggs confirmed. An irrevocable trust is a separate legal entity. Your grandfather set it up back when he had full mental capacity. Had me document everything. Multiple witnesses. Medical evaluations proving he was of sound mind. That POA your father's been waving around has no more power over the Sea Urchin Trust than a grocery list. I started laughing. Couldn't help it. Started laughing so hard tears came in my eyes. That sneaky old man. That brilliant, sneaky old man. He knew, Mr. Boggs said quietly. Knew exactly what they'd do. Knew they'd come sniffing around when he got sick. Knew they'd push papers in front of him. Knew they'd sell that property before his body was cold. So he built a trap. A legal trap. So perfect they walked right into it with smiles on their faces. When can I come see you? Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. Bring that logbook. We have work to do. I hung up and just sat there, staring at the water-stained journal in my hands. Grandpa had known everything. Predicted it all like he was reading tide tables. They thought they'd outsmarted an old fisherman who never finished 8th grade. Thought they'd pulled off the perfect theft. But he'd been playing a completely different game. One they didn't even know existed. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Deep and dreamless. The next morning, I was at Boggs's office before 9. It was exactly what I'd pictured. Old wood paneling. Bookshelves full of legal volumes. A secretary with reading glasses on a chain. The smell of coffee and old paper. Mr. Boggs was older than I remembered. Had to be pushing 80, but his eyes were sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a bow tie. Actual bow tie. Nobody under 70 wore those anymore. He shook my hand with a grip that was surprisingly strong. You look just like him, he said. Same eyes. Same jaw. He'd be proud of you, Tom. We sat in his office. He pulled out a file folder that had to be 3 inches thick. This is a Sea Urchin Trust. Every document. Every filing, every piece of evidence showing that your grandfather, Frank Franklin, had full mental capacity when he created this in 1998 and transferred the water rights to it. We had 3 doctors evaluate him, had it witnessed and notarized, did everything by the book and then some. He spread the papers across his desk. The trust owns exclusive commercial navigation rights to the deep water channel adjacent to property. It's all legal. All documented. Been sitting in the county records for 26 years. Anyone who actually looked would have found it. But they didn't look. They assumed an old fisherman wouldn't be smart enough to do something like this. I picked up one of the documents. Read through it. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear. Without these rights, that property is worthless as a marina or resort, I said. Worse than worthless, Boggs corrected. It's a liability. Your father sold it to Coastal Development Group for $2 million, but they've already started the planning for Coral Vistas. $50 million luxury resort, marina, charter boats, the whole package. Except now they can't do any of it. Every boat that tries to leave their property has to go through your channel, and you control access. What happens now? Now we inform them of the situation, and then we negotiate. His smile reminded me of Grandpa's, the look of someone who knew exactly how the game would play out. We drove down to property the next day. My property, former property, whatever it was now. The transformation was jarring. They'd already started demolition. The boathouse was gone. Grandpa's dock was torn up. The whole lot was cleared and graded. Construction equipment everywhere. There was a big banner stretched across the entrance. Coral Vistas, Luxury Coastal Living, coming 2026. A group of people stood near a trailer that served as the on-site office. My father, Sherry, and a man in a hard hat and expensive casual clothes who had to be the developer, Mr. Slate. According to the name on the trailer, they were drinking mimosas, champagne at 10 in the morning, celebrating. Music was playing from a Bluetooth speaker. Some pop garbage that all sounded the same. A massive excavator sat at the edge of the water channel. The operator was in the cab, about to start digging. Mr. Boggs walked straight up to them like he owned the place, which, legally speaking, he sort of did. Shut down the excavator. He called out. His voice had this quality that made people listen. The voice of someone used to being taken seriously. The music stopped. Everyone turned. Sherry recovered first. Smiled that practiced smile. Can I help you? I'm representing the Sea Urchin Trust. I'm ordering you to cease all construction activities immediately. You're in violation of commercial navigation rights. Sherry laughed. Actually laughed. Trust? What trust? This is private property. We own this land. You need to leave before I call the sheriff. But the developer, Slate, wasn't laughing. He was looking at Mr. Boggs with an expression I recognized. The look of a businessman who just heard something very expensive go wrong. What rights? He asked carefully. Boggs handed him a folder. Slate opened it. Started reading. I watched his face change color. Red to white in about 30 seconds. He looked at the documents, looked at the excavator sitting at the edge of my channel, looked at the $50 million project he'd just started that couldn't access the ocean. Then he looked at Sherry, and the look on his face was murder. You, he said quietly, voice shaking. You did the title search. You assured me there were no encumbrances, no easements, no complications. Sherry's smile had frozen on her face. I checked everything. The land is clear. This is some kind of mistake. Slate turned to Boggs. These documents are legitimate, filed with the county in 1998, renewed and updated in 2015. All proper, all legal. Your property has no commercial access to navigable water without permission from the trust. The silence was incredible. My father finally spoke up. His voice was thin, uncertain. See, urchin? That was just Frank's joke. Some old fishing thing. Not a joke, I said. Everyone looked at me like they'd just noticed I was there. Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing. He set it up years ago, made me the beneficiary. I own the water access rights. Sherry's face went through several expressions. Confusion, realization, panic. She'd built her whole career on reading real estate documents, and she'd missed this. The one thing that mattered. Slate stepped away from them, pulled Boggs and me aside, spoke low. Okay, I don't know what's happening here, but I'm not interested in who did what to whom. I'm interested in salvaging my project. What do you want? I looked over at my father, saw him finally understanding. Saw the exact moment he realized what Grandpa had done. What I want, I repeated. My father sold you land for $2 million. Land that his father built from nothing. Land that meant everything to our family. Sold it without thinking twice. So here's what I want. Slate waited. $10 million for permanent commercial navigation rights, plus 5% of Coral Vista's net profits. Forever. I heard Sherry gasp behind us. Slate didn't even blink. Done. What? I said done. He pulled out his phone, started making calls. I need my lawyers here now, and someone from the bank. Within an hour, we had lawyers and bankers swarming the site. Papers were drawn up. I signed them. Slate signed them. Money was transferred. $10 million hit my account. The Sea Urchin Trust had just paid out what Grandpa always intended. But that wasn't the best part. The best part was watching Slate turn back to my father and Sherry. Now let's talk about your fraud, he said. His voice had gone cold. Clinical. You sold me a property that was effectively landlocked from its primary value source. You failed to disclose critical encumbrances. That's real estate fraud, breach of contract, misrepresentation. My father tried to stammer something. Sherry went pale. I'm suing you for the $2 million you took from me, plus the $10 million I just had to pay this young man, plus my development delays, plus my legal fees, plus punitive damages for fraud. By the time my lawyers are done, you won't have enough money for a bus ticket. He turned and walked away. Sherry tried to follow him, started saying something about how this wasn't her fault. She couldn't have known. There must be some mistake. He didn't even look back. My father stood there, just stood there looking at me with this expression, like he couldn't quite process what had happened. I walked over to him. Grandpa knew, I said quietly, knew what you'd do, knew you'd sell his home the second you could. So he built a trap, one you were too greedy to see coming. I didn't, he started. Yeah, you did. You left when I was 5, missed 21 years of my life, then showed up when there was money to be made. Well, congratulations. You got what you came for, and it's going to cost you everything. I turned and walked away. Behind me, I could hear Sherry starting to cry. My father trying to talk to Slate's lawyers. The sound of construction equipment shutting down. Mr. Boggs gave me a ride back to town. We didn't talk much. Didn't need to. At his office, he handed me the logbook. Your grandfather wanted you to have this. All of it. The money, the rights, the property. But more than that, he wanted you to understand something. What's that? People always fight over land. They see dirt and buildings and lots you can put a price on. They think that's where power is, where value is. But your grandfather was a fisherman. He knew better. Boggs looked out the window, toward the ocean. Land is just where you stand while you wait. But water? Water is life. Water is movement. Water is everything that matters. You can own all the land in the world, but if you can't get to the water, you've got nothing. He handed me the trust documents. Your grandfather spent 40 years reading the ocean, reading tides and pressure, and the subtle signs that told him where to go. Turns out he could read people just as well. He knew your father would come, knew exactly what would happen. So he set a trap in the one place they'd never think to look, under the surface, in the deep water. I took the documents, the logbook, started to leave. Tom, Boggs called after me. Your grandfather left me a message to give you, if everything worked out the way he planned. What did he say? Boggs smiled. He said to tell you, smart fish stay in deep water. The ones that swim in the shallows get caught. I drove back to that motel, my cheap room with the rattling AC, but I was only there long enough to pack. By evening, I'd found an apartment. Nothing fancy, but it overlooked the marina. I stood on the balcony watching the sunset paint the water orange and gold, holding Grandpa's logbook. My phone buzzed. A notification from my bank. The 5% of Coral Vista's profits. First payment. Another $70,000. I'd done the math. At current projections, the resort would make me about $2 million a year in passive income. Forever. Grandpa had given me more than money. He'd given me freedom. security, the ability to live life on my terms instead of scrambling for scraps. But more than that, he'd given me a lesson I'd never forget. I opened the logbook one more time. Read that last entry. Water holds everything. He was right. The ocean had held our family for 3 generations, had provided for us, protected us, and in the end, it had been our salvation. Everyone else had fought over the land, pushed papers around, played their legal games, thought they were so clever. But Grandpa knew something they never understood, something every fisherman learns. Land is just dirt. You can buy it, sell it, fight over it, put fences around it. But water? Water doesn't care about your deeds or your claims or your lawyers. Water just is. Constant and powerful and deeper than anyone imagines. They'd gone after the shore, the visible part, the easy target. Grandpa had given me the depths. Last I heard, my father and Sherry declared bankruptcy within 6 months. Slate's lawsuit destroyed them. They lost everything. The $2 million, their savings, their car, their future. My father tried to call me once. I didn't answer. Some people say I should have helped them. That family is family. That I should have shown mercy. But they didn't show mercy to Grandpa. Didn't show mercy to me. They came to take what wasn't theirs, and they got exactly what they deserved. Grandpa taught me that the ocean has rules. You respect them, or you pay the price. You can't cheat the tide. Can't sweet-talk the current. Can't lawyer your way out of riptide. They tried to grab the sea urchin without knowing what they were dealing with. And every single spine went deep.